All right. Good afternoon. In the name of being fully honest about what I'm doing here, I have to tell you that I just recorded a great version of this video and then I realized I didn't take mute off, so there was no sound. Anyway, welcome back to Media Monday. Hopefully nothing else goes wrong today. I apologize for not making a video last week. It was family day and I wasn't feeling great, and I thought we were partway through 4 of our concepts, of the 8 concepts, and it might be a good time to stop. Of course, I also just recorded, and the sound you might be hearing in the background wasn't going, and now they've started up again. So if that is happening, I apologize, but hopefully you can hear me over it. So, very quickly to summarize where we were at, we've talked about 4 concepts so far. The first one is that all media are constructions. Just basically means that every piece of media that you see, there have been decisions made about it, often by people who are very good at what they do. Second concept says that the media construct versions of reality, which means that those constructions they have attitudes, interpretations, and conclusions built in. Simply choosing what to tell a story about, that's an attitude right there. What stories to tell and which ones not to. That concept also talks about that if you don't have direct experience with something, and the media is where you get most of your information, then it's actually the media that is constructing your reality. Third concept talks about audiences negotiating meaning, which basically means that each one of us takes in information. We put it through a series of filters, depending on how we're doing that day, how we're feeling, our attitudes to race, to sex, all sorts of different things are filters, and then we get meaning from it, which is why 2 people can watch the same movie and have 2 very different reactions to it. Fourth concept talks about money, economic or commercial implications. 2 parts to it. The first part says that because our media is mainly commercial media, it's a business and it must make a profit. It makes decisions based on that, right? Whoever's watching the most, if a show doesn't get watched enough, it will be canceled. Works a little bit differently these days with our streaming services, but that's the gist of it, is that shows, records, performers, whoever must reach a certain level, or else they will not continue. It talks about, the second part of that concept too talks about how more and more of our media is owned by fewer and fewer people. That I think the last time I taught the course, 95% of our mainstream media is owned by 6 big corporations. And because they're constantly trying to make a profit, they do whatever works the fastest, right? They are under intense pressure to make money. So today this brings us to concept number 5, which says that media messages contain ideological and value messages. I'm going to say right up front that this concept and the next one are the 2 that have probably changed the most, that I've thought a lot about over the last 20 years of teaching the course. And it's not that they're not true. I think they're both true. It's just that I'm not sure they should be separate. The difficulty that I have is that I'm not sure where one ends and the next one begins. And I'll talk a little bit more about that. I think what I'll do is I'll explain today's concept. I'll do next Monday, and then at the end of next week I'll explain something called the feedback loop, which I think does a pretty good job of explaining how the 2 of them do work together. All right. So today, yes, media messages contain ideological and value messages. Basically, what if you talk about ideology, that's our worldview, right? The way that we look at things, and this is sometimes a difficult one to understand, partly because we are living in the culture where our media is produced. I used to always say to my students that if you travel, today we can access shows from around the world. Have a look at them. Used to be very common that one or 2 of my students would go to France or somewhere in Europe during the course. They'd come back and I'd ask them. I'd say, "Okay, did you turn on the TV? Did you see a movie? How was it different?" And one of the most common things was usually about TV. They'd be in the hotel room and they'd turn it on, and for instance, there might be a topless woman in an ad, and that was shocking to them, right? Of course, here in North America, well, I don't know if this is still the case, but certainly in the past, we've been You get hung up on nudity, anything to do with sex. I mean, you can kill whoever you want in a television show, but sex is a no-no, which is again an ideological idea and an interesting one. But here, certainly, nudity on mainstream in our networks is not acceptable. Commercials, you wouldn't see it, at least not yet. But in Europe, it is. So yeah, so sometimes traveling is a good way of seeing how other countries look at things, what their ideological and values are. So yeah, so the concept says this. I was also going to say that a good way to think about it too is, if you were to be dropped here suddenly, you're an alien and you're dropped here suddenly and you turned on the TV, think about the messages that you receive from that, right? So E.T., the movie does that. There's a scene where he's left alone, E.T. goes and turns on the TV, and he learns things, right? He learns, I think, about beer from a beer commercial. He learns about love, which of course is where this connection between Elliot and E.T. starts, because Elliot then goes and kisses the girl that he's admired. But yeah, that is sometimes a good way of thinking about trying to understand it, because when you're living in it, it's hard to see those ideological messages. Okay, so the concept says this. It says all media products are advertising in some sense. Okay, so even ads, yes, they're ads for products, but TV shows, ads, movies, they're also ads. They proclaim values and ways of life. So they teach us things, right? The mainstream media convey explicitly or implicitly. Okay, so if you don't know what those words mean, I often use my iceberg metaphor. So explicit messages are the top of the iceberg that's out of the water, right? That's the stuff that we can see. It's in your face. An ad, for instance, the explicit message is buy whatever it is we're selling. The implicit stuff is underneath. Think in an iceberg, it's 80 or 85% of the iceberg is under the water, which is probably true with these messages too, but they're implicit. They're suggested rather than being told. So it might be, the ad might say one thing, but the images might show something else. Okay. And that's important because often, I think I mentioned earlier that one of the arguments as to why media is so effective is that we don't try to fight it, right? We just accept it. We don't think it has an effect on us. Therefore, we let our guard down. Same thing could be argued with implicit messages. We don't think about them the same way, right? So we don't think about them at all at times. So we don't have the ability to kind of argue against them. All right. So these ideological or ideology is just simply a worldview, right? These ideological messages contain things about issues such as the nature of the good life and the virtues of consumerism. So the nature of the good life, I mean, again, I think it's pretty self-explanatory, but if I used to always say, think of lottery ads. I think in Ontario it's Lotto 649, although I don't play the lottery, so I'm not sure. They put on a lot of ads. Usually they're things like imagine the freedom. And of course, what they're talking about is the freedom to spend, the freedom to travel, the freedom to, having multiple houses, multiple cars. This is what a lot of people think the good life is. Now, again, I won't get into my argument against that right now, but certainly that's, whether or not that's something that we're born with, I'm not sure, which is why I said earlier, I'm not sure if it's about reflecting or affecting, but I'll save that again for next week. The virtue of consumerism is just the idea that shopping is good, right? And again, I think it's pretty common. I remember teaching my class where I would ask students, if you ever feel down, what do? And they would regularly tell me they go shopping. And I think that's a pretty common thing. We've been conditioned to think that way. And we do think of shopping as virtuous, right? Think of how many ads suggest that, by buying something, not only are you getting something for yourself, but you're helping someone else, or you're helping the economy. That was the first thing George Bush said after 9/11 was keep the economy rolling, get out there and buy some stuff, with no real thought to what had just happened and perhaps, that we need to rethink our way of life. But anyway, probably the most egregious example I've ever seen is I used to have an ad up on my board that said, I shop, therefore I am, right? Getting real philosophical there. But yeah, that's an idea that is in most advertising, which is that, products will bring us instant joy, right? Most of us, I think, realize that, yeah, it's nice to have stuff, but that instant feeling, feeling good because I have something new often passes the moment you get it home and start using that thing. Other types of messages that we get, the role of men and women in society, right? We still get this today, certainly from the point of view of sex objects, there are different messages about men and women, right? There's no doubt about it. That continues today, and it's been an issue for a long time now. But what men and women can actually do is changing too, right? And there is a bit of a shift, I would say a positive shift in the media because of that. Right now, as a basketball fan, I've been watching this Caitlin Clark, who's a college basketball player, and she's really changing the game. She's changing, and there's also its acceptance. For the first time on Sunday afternoons, they're showing women's basketball games, which was never the case. It was simply impossible to find for years, but now you can find it. I'll talk a little bit more about that when I give you my example in a second. The acceptance of authority, right, is another one that comes through, and unquestioning patriotism. So these are things that we see in our television shows, in our movies, and they teach us that we shouldn't challenge certain things, that we should just accept things that the way they are. The patriotism idea, one example that I often give is, as a basketball fan, right? So every year at the start of the NCAA season, the first game that they televise is always connected somehow to the Army. The Army sponsors it. One year it was actually on an aircraft carrier. They put a basketball court on an aircraft carrier. They had all the soldiers there, or whatever they are. Sorry, the Navy people. Even the teams, their jerseys were their right color, but they kind of had a camouflage effect to them. So again, no one said this is about patriotism, but everything about the show and the game told us that about we should be patriotic. That's why they bring out the flag at the start of the Super Bowl, the flag that covers the field, right? That wasn't always the case. They didn't always do that, but somebody along the lines realized, hey, we can really push this idea if we actually televise and make people stand up before these games. All right. So while the media may not be directly responsible for creating these values and attitudes, right? So a lot of these are already in our culture. They do legitimize and reinforce them. And like I said, I'm going to argue that they do actually shape them a little bit, maybe not as much as some people would argue, but I'll save that for next week. So what I would often do as an example in my class, just to, again, I like to make simple examples. They don't have to be super subtle, was we would watch two different sitcoms. So I would usually show them an episode of Leave It to Beaver, right, 1950s sitcom. And then when it was done, I would simply ask them, okay, what are the values that are in that show? What did you see? And they would immediately point out, everybody was white, for instance. The show has very few people of color in it. I think there might have been a couple episodes where a black character appeared, but normally he was an athlete coming to the school or something like that. The family, right, themselves was kind of the traditional nuclear family. Father, mother, two boys, the white picket fence, the beautiful house, the manicured lawn. Even within that, go back to talk about sex roles. Ward was always the breadwinner. He was always going out to work. June, the wife, was always at the door with his lunch, seeing him out. She would often be in the kitchen. Even though she was in the kitchen, she was never in her pajamas, perhaps like we would be today. She was wearing her best dress with her pearls. We never saw her. In fact, we never saw her bedroom. We never saw the parents' bedroom. That was just something that you didn't do at the time, right? I think Archie Bunker was the first person to make reference to a toilet in a television show. Beyond that, you wouldn't talk about it. Even going back to I Love Lucy, when Lucille Ball got pregnant in real life, they were going to postpone the taping of the show, because no one had ever talked about pregnancy on television, and they thought it was, you just didn't do it. Whereas, of course, that's very different today. And yeah, so like I said, they don't create these values, but they do legitimize them and reinforce them, right, by seeing these same messages over and over and over again. The critical viewer tries to uncover these ideological messages and value systems by looking out for such issues as what groups are represented and which groups are left out, right? This is a big one today. This is one, it's kind of where we're at right now, where there's a pushback to this idea. So for years, white, straight people dominated our media. That's who were in our stories. And now we're trying to tell these other stories of other people. And some people, I've heard people say that, well, why do you have to push it down my throat? And my response always to that is, well, do we push straight down your throat because you see it all the time? And of course, their answer would be, well, no, that's just, well, they might say natural. But really what it is that's all we've seen. That those are the only ideological messages that we've seen for so long that we accept them. So these other ones challenge that a little bit. And yes, it might feel to someone who grew up at a different time that's being pushed down their throat. But really, all these people want is to be represented, right? When I used to teach the course, kind of in the 90s, we talked a lot about, well, how are females presented in the media, right? What options are they given? And unfortunately, it didn't matter at the time. Whatever they did, they were always sex objects, right? They were always meant to be looked at. I'm not sure that's much better today. I social media, some of the stuff I see, I think, holy, I'm not sure we've made much progress. Certainly, we have more representations, and you can find them if you look for them. But there are still messages there that I struggle with. I used to show another documentary called Real Injun, Reel, and I really liked it because we have an indigenous community around us. With they live with us as well, but we have a couple, the Saugeen Reserve and Cape Croker, not far from here. And one of the things they talk about in this documentary is how, first of all, Indians, as they use that term, weren't on screen, and when they did finally appear on screen, of course, they only appeared in certain ways. They were the savage, right? Or they were the noble. I'm a big fan of One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. In that case, it's the noble giant. They weren't presented in a number of different ways, right? So they started to learn. They were also portrayed as drunks, as alcoholics, when you see yourself, either you don't see yourself at all, or you see yourself only portrayed in certain ways that are often negative, it can be quite damaging, right? And so that's one of the things why it's important to at least understand this idea, is that there are lots of ideological and value messages within all the media that we consume. All right, I think I'll stop there. As always, thank you for your time and your patience. I hope I covered everything in this video that I did in the last one that I didn't record the audio. If you can subscribe, that would be great. If you can share this, that would be great. If you have questions, of course, please ask. I like getting questions. I will try to answer them, and if nothing else, they will maybe give me something to talk about next time. If you want to go to goodnoise.ca and see what else I'm doing in the world of photography and writing, you could go there. I have a mailing list you could sign up for. Any or all of that stuff helps, and I really appreciate it. So thank you, and I will see you next week. Goodbye.